This is crazy. SpaceX is racing towards Flight 5 as pressure builds on the FAA to pick up the pace. Ship 34 has completed its first stack, but something is different. Musk gives an updated timeline and plan for Mars. Is it realistic? And Blue Origin finally static fires New Glenn's upper stage in preparation for its maiden flight. My name is Felix, welcome to What About It, let's dive right in. Starship updates. SpaceX is firing on all cylinders. After the flood of activity over the past few days, with SpaceX managing to stack both the booster and the ship for Flight 5 in only a day and a half, it became clear that SpaceX was done with just waiting around for the regulators. SpaceX has now begun the final testing campaign of this pair. What we saw was a partial wet dress rehearsal and ground support equipment or GSE test. Ship and booster were filled with a small amount of propellant as a validation check to ensure everything was working properly on both the vehicle and the ground hardware. With that done, all SpaceX needs to do now is the full wet dress rehearsal, but it looks like SpaceX will be waiting a bit longer to perform that, possibly till closer to the launch. So all that's left now is to wait for the FAA's all clear and some paperwork. Then SpaceX will perform its full wet dress rehearsal and launch. On that note, it looks like more and more voices are starting to oppose the FAA's timeline, with a California representative even voicing complaints about the agency's slow process. And he is not alone. Hopefully things in that area will begin to speed up soon, or at the very least, this delay will help highlight the inefficiencies involved in this process and ensure that future launches are not held up for similar reasons. Safety is important. There is no indication though that it is not of great interest to SpaceX. Looking at all its different activities, it seems rather clear that SpaceX operates at a very high level of safety. In the meantime, while SpaceX waits for Flight 5 to fly and gain more flight data, it has found another way to get data without flying. Although technically it is data from a flight, it is just one that has already happened. I teased this on the last episode. Flight 4, which flew over 3.5 months ago, accomplished almost all its goals. Both the ship and booster splashed down mostly in one piece. They sank to the bottom of the ocean shortly after their return from space, meaning the only information SpaceX could retrieve from this pair was the data gathered during flight. Or at least that was until a few days ago when Elon Musk shared this picture. It looks like even though Booster 11 sank to the bottom of the ocean, SpaceX still wasn't done with this beast. Over a few weeks, the vessel Hoss Ridgewind worked near where the booster landed, using a team of divers, ROVs, and a crane attached to the ship to attempt to recover portions of the booster. ROV in this case stands for Remotely Operated Vehicle. Uncrewed mini-subs, and clearly this fishing trip was pretty successful. We can see that the ship spent multiple days at sea hauling up this piece of hardware. It's possible that SpaceX will also decide to retrieve more than just this one section of engines. Right now, the only piece we know they've recovered is a portion of the engine section, including a part of the outer booster engines. With the ship scheduled to return to port just before this video is released, we should have more information soon. So what will SpaceX be able to learn from hauling up these waterlogged engines? Well, one thing they may be able to learn is why this booster had so many engine failures during flight. If SpaceX's engineers still had questions about why some of its engines failed, what better way to learn than by examining the actual hardware? After all, despite this booster successfully launching the ship to orbit before landing, it still lost 2 engines during that process, and SpaceX may want to investigate further. Another thing to inspect and learn from is wear and tear on the engine section itself, and if they could retrieve it, the upper section of the booster. While less than the ship, the booster does experience quite the stress when coming back down. Since Booster 11 did perform a full return, studying the engine bay heat shield and the engines themselves would be pure knowledge gold for SpaceX's engineers. I suggested to SpaceX that this would be a perfect symbol to display in front of Starbase. This is what many other old players in the spaceflight industry are afraid of. Risk it all and learn from it. SpaceX can use the information that they learn from this recovered aft section to improve future boosters and possibly even future ships as well. After all, the Raptor engines are a very important part of all this. Given how quickly SpaceX is moving to Block 2 ships, it's likely they want as much data as possible before they get up to full production speed. Although it's clear that SpaceX is already working very hard to ramp up production now with the next Block 2 ship speeding toward completion. Before I tell you about that, we've looked into our channel metrics and there are over 2 million returning monthly viewers who have not subscribed yet. Help us improve the channel even further by double checking that you've hit that subscribe button so you don't miss our updates. And while you're at it, give us a like and become a wise supporter. Why? Because you'll gain access to a massive amount of extra content. With it, you get access to daily new Starbase photo galleries, including all those we've posted so far. Satellite, aerial and ground photos, more than 400 posts in the past 2 years alone, with up to 7 picture galleries per week. Insights, chats with me, you name it. Thank you so much, you rock. Ship 33, the first of the newly designed Block 2 ships, is complete, and now Ship 34 is racing to that status as well. Last week, its payload segments, which include the nose cone and the payload bay door, were rolled into the high bay for their first set of stacking. And stacking has successfully been completed. After it was stacked, this payload section was rolled out to the high bay and over to the Starfactory? Yep, it seems SpaceX still wants to do some work on this section before continuing its stacking. The reason for this is still unknown, but looking closely at the ship, we might be able to come up with a few possibilities. One possible reason is the weld between these two sections. When Ship 33 was rolled into Megabay 2, we could see that the weld connecting between these two segments was lined with bumps and seemed somewhat low quality. But looking at Ship 34's weld line, we can see that that's not the case at all. It's possible that SpaceX changed the technique for welding the payload segments together and wants to inspect them in the Starfactory. Another possibility is to continue working on this segment. It's possible that SpaceX is rolling this ship into the Starfactory to begin installing internal pieces, possibly even for payload deployment purposes. After all, if this ship does end up being the ship for Flight 7, SpaceX will likely have gathered much of the needed flight data at this point and will likely begin flying ships to a full orbit. This ship may be the first to deploy Starlink satellites, and therefore this payload segment needs more work in preparation for this. Whatever the case is, it's likely that this nose cone won't be in the Starfactory for long, and we should hopefully see it roll to Megabay 2 ahead of stacking within the next few days. SpaceX is all in on this new design. But Block 2 isn't the final design for Starship. Many upgrades are still planned for this vehicle, with Block 3 likely being an even larger upgrade than Block 2. One of the possible upgrades for Block 3 is an overhauled structure using thinner 3mm steel. And now we have spotted this. This cart holds steel coils for easier transport. The raw material looks like this when delivered. Thanks to some labels on the side, we can see that it is specifically designed for 3mm rolls of steel, which are not intended for flight articles. In comparison, the currently used steel for Starship hull construction is 3.97mm thick. So roughly 1/4 thicker. That also means 1/4 more weight. This means that SpaceX is still in the testing phase for this thinner material, and we may have already seen prototypes with it, such as Test Tank 16, which is currently at Massey's. This is huge, because if SpaceX can successfully build a ship and booster with this thinner steel, they can drastically reduce the weight of the overall vehicle, allowing for a much greater payload weight capacity. Remember, 25% reduction. Moving our attention from flight hardware to ground hardware, something pretty interesting was just recently spotted. Check this out. Looking at this, it's clear that it is very heavy duty, and the angles that it has cut into it suggest that more pieces will be added at an angle. It's possible that this new piece of hardware is part of Pad B's orbital launch mount. If that's the case, we should start to see more of these soon as SpaceX begins assembling it. Once that happens, we should see if SpaceX decides to make this a movable launch mount similar to the one at Massey's, which would allow for easier access to the engines and pad maintenance. Yes, that would be great. It will also be interesting to see how SpaceX tackles the outer booster engine startup. Those initially start with ground-side hardware on the orbital launch mount. However, based on the pictures of this possible launch mount, it does not appear to have any cutouts for the hold-down clamps or the engine connections. If this is for the new launch mount, those are likely on a different section. Watching SpaceX build all of these prototypes at such a fast pace would make it easy to think that this is full speed, but that's not the case at all. SpaceX has the goal of producing around 100 Starships per year from this one factory. At the current rate, SpaceX is only producing about 5 per year. So production needs to ramp up a lot more, and that is why SpaceX has been putting so much effort into completing the Starfactory recently. Thanks to our recent flyovers with Redline helicopter tours, it's clear that work on the Starfactory is in its final stages. Over just the last month, SpaceX has almost entirely completed the external paneling for the office building, with very few sections that still need work. Once this office building is done, the Starfactory will have everything it needs to begin ramping up production. However, we do know that this will not be the end of the upgrades to the Starfactory, as SpaceX at the very least seems to have plans to add a third megabay. On our flyovers, we also saw that SpaceX had added quite a few foundation piles to the land they recently acquired from a troll. Looking at where that foundation lies, it is possible that SpaceX plans on expanding the Starfactory even more, as the original plan had the Starfactory overlapping with this area before SpaceX was unable to acquire it. Looking on the ground carefully, we can also see that there are quite a few construction beams throughout the area, suggesting that SpaceX plans on building even more structures. All of this work comes in time for a big anniversary for Starbase. It turned 10. Yep, SpaceX has been working in Boca Chica, Texas since 2014, when it first purchased the land. For the first few years, very little was done, and the initial plan was to have this area as a Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy launch site. Did you know that? However, plans quickly changed as SpaceX realized it would be an ideal location for the construction and testing of its rapidly changing Starship rocket from its original construction facility in California. This one decision brought the Starship program to Starbase, and now 10 years later it's the most advanced spaceport in the world, producing the world's largest and most powerful rocket. SpaceX needs all of this to accomplish one goal: making humanity a multiplanetary species. Except the only place humans have ever been is the moon, and we haven't been back in over 50 years. I really don't like that. But now SpaceX has yet again clarified on this plan. Over the years, SpaceX's Starship plans have moved around quite a bit. Looking back at one of the earliest plans for Starship when it was still made out of carbon fiber and known as the BFR, we can see that they didn't quite make that date. This was back in 2016, and the goal was to have the first uncrewed Mars landing in 2022 and a crewed landing this year. Yeah, this year? Even though there's not been a launch towards Mars yet, remember how much this project evolved in those 8 years compared to other space-related projects. However, the new plan has quite a few interesting changes. For starters, it will hopefully happen in 2026, just 2 years from now. As opposed to the original plan with 2 Starships, SpaceX will be sending 5. Yes! This will likely be for redundancy, and so SpaceX can test slightly different designs to see which one works best. It's also likely that these will be carrying cargo, as well as some scientific instruments. Looking at the plan from 2016, it's likely SpaceX still plans on doing something very similar, with these 5 Starships carrying mining equipment, extra life support equipment, as well as instruments to look for water. And similar to the plan laid out in 2016, if this 5 Starship mission turns out to be a success, then a crewed mission could, in theory, happen in 2028, just 4 years from now. So if you're just starting high school, humans may be on their way to Mars by the time you enter college. The logistics around this will likely be very complicated, with SpaceX also likely needing to perform lunar landings and launch its Starlink satellites from Starship simultaneously. Poof. This means a rapid launch cadence will be necessary. By then, SpaceX will likely need to launch at least 50 Starships per year, which is about 25 times what they are doing right now. However, given the pace at which SpaceX has been moving for once, this timeline does not seem completely impossible. The original plan to launch in 2022 was aspirational at best, but with SpaceX's already demonstrated capability, a launch in just 2 years seems likely. Not a SpaceX fanboy, take the past year and a half as an indicator. We went from Flight 1, a beautiful mess with both stages failing and a crater forming under the launch mount, to Flight 4, which saw the pad working perfectly and both stages reaching re-entry and soft landing. SpaceX may not launch all 5 of these ships out to Mars in that window. Still, even if they only launched a single one, that would be an accomplishment unlike any other, as a single Starship going to Mars would be more mass flying flying to another planet than all of humanity has ever launched towards the Red Planet, or rather towards any planet other than Earth combined. Let's turn our attention now to a company with its own extremely ambitious goals. Blue Origin, Jeff Bezos' rocket company, has been working on its own extremely ambitious rocket, New Glenn. New Glenn may be smaller than Starship, but for Blue Origin it is arguably just as ambitious. Although Blue Origin was founded even before SpaceX, they've only developed one relatively small suborbital rocket, New Shepard. Now Blue Origin wants to go big, going from a suborbital rocket the size of one of Falcon 9's landing legs to an orbital rocket that towers over the Falcon 9. It's like if SpaceX attempted to go straight from the tiny Falcon 1 to the Falcon Heavy, completely skipping the Falcon 9 while trying to master reusability on the first flight. Blue Origin is fast approaching its first launch of the New Glenn, which is currently scheduled for sometime in November. This is why we've also seen this rocket enter its final testing campaign. And now Blue Origin checked off another box before launch. Even the second stage of New Glenn is larger and more powerful than any rocket Blue Origin has ever flown. Nearly 350,000 pounds of thrust, which is over 3 times the amount of thrust that New Shepard produces. And now that second stage has completed its hotfire campaign with both of its engines successfully igniting to simulate a launch. Knowing Blue Origin, they will likely roll this second stage back to their production facility to check over every inch of it before clearing it. Good luck with the inspection. Blue Origin isn't exactly known for its speed, but when it does finally produce something, you can expect it to be pretty close to the final design. Every part is pre-tested, meaning there is a high chance that the engineers will give the all clear. This is the last test that this upper stage needed to perform before stacking ahead of launch, showing Blue Origin is on track for its November launch date. Yes! Hopefully every other part of the launch continues to go well, especially after the unfortunate delay of its payload. Fortunately for Blue Origin, this delay will at least give them a bit more leeway with their schedule. And speaking of rockets that have had delays to their payload, ULA's Vulcan, which successfully flew for the first time back in January, is set to launch in just a week on October 4th. Unfortunately for ULA, the second mission will not have a payload as originally intended. Instead, it will fly a mass simulator to fully certify Vulcan to begin flying national security payloads. That's where the money is. In preparation for that flight, Vulcan is now fully stacked and ready to move to the pad. This flight will be very similar to the first, with Vulcan sporting only 2 side-mounted solid rocket boosters. With the rocket fully assembled, teams will check over everything ahead of its full wet dress rehearsal to ensure this second certification mission is ready to go. If everything goes according to the plan, after the certification mission launches, ULA can begin flying national security payloads possibly as soon as November. Hopefully ULA will be able to keep Vulcan competitive in this ever-changing launch market, especially as more and more reusable rockets come online to undercut this increasingly outdated seeming new vehicle. With dozens of companies around the world striving for reusability, it is no surprise that some of them will inevitably lead to some energetic conclusions, if you know what I mean. A few episodes ago, we mentioned how there were multiple Chinese companies working on their own hopper designs to help them learn how to propulsively land a rocket. One of those companies was Landspace, which had recently successfully performed a 10-kilometer hop test. Another one of those companies was Deep Blue Space, which has now completed its own hop test. This one, however, was a bit less successful. The rocket successfully took to the skies, keeping its engine lit for both the ascent and descent, similar to SpaceX's hopper test vehicles. Everything seemed to be going perfectly, with the vehicle rising a few hundred feet in the air before slowly descending under its own propulsion. So far. It then successfully made it over the landing pad before deploying its landing legs, and then boom! So close. Unfortunately for Deep Blue Space, it seems the test did end with a slight anomaly. The hopper hovered just a few feet above the launch pad before its engines cut just moments too early. This didn't appear to be an engine failure, rather it appears that the engine purposely shut down. This means it was likely a failure of the hopper's guidance and navigation system, with the vehicle likely believing it had already touched down whenever its engines cut off. Despite this extremely spectacular failure, it's essentially the best case scenario, as it's likely a software problem that can be easily revised. Unfortunately, the vehicle was still lost in the process, meaning that if they want to attempt this maneuver again, they'll need to build a whole new hopper. But now Deep Blue has also shown that its hardware works, and with a few minor tweaks it would have been fully successful instead of just 99%. We'll keep an eye on Deep Blue and the many other companies around the world attempting to catch up with SpaceX as they race to build the next Falcon 9. That's it for today. Remember to smash that like button, subscribe for more. This is what fuels the algorithm. This is how you can help us for free. Check out our epic shirts in your favorite Space Nerd store. A new Raptor design and our epic Flight 5 design are both up. Link is in the description and in the card you should see now. They're selling faster than we can process the orders. And if you want to train your space IQ even further, watch this video next to continue your journey. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you again in the next episode. SpaceX dizzily diddly boo. Demonstrated capabilities. I don't know why I said that. I don't like it. Thank you so much. You rock.